Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where yesterday one of you excitedly wrote to me online, Grace, you have to watch the new Pirates of the Caribbean 5 international trailer because Keira Knightley is in it, which, well, again, I really appreciated that person's enthusiasm, made it so that I couldn't react to the trailer because my reaction wouldn't be that interesting to watch because I already knew Keira Knightley was going to show up. And she only shows up really for a single shot, which really only signals her return. There isn't much else to comment on. So I still wanted to talk about it, and I'm glad that so many of you want to know my opinion on it, so I decided the best place to do that would be Morning Movie News. All right, so again, it's the Japanese trailer, and I think it's interesting that they decided to give this away. I mean, I can see the real struggle in terms of Disney publicity's internal discussion, right? They're like, well, she's only going to be in it maybe for a few seconds, right? And it's going to come out as soon as anyone sees the movie that she's in it already. So why not put it in the international trailer to maybe get people more interested in a movie that's really finding itself in a street fight with Baywatch. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. So I think that they're just trying to pull out all the stops to get people talking about Pirates of the Caribbean 5. And putting Keira Knightley in the Japanese trailer isn't the only thing they're doing. For instance, it was just announced this week, or discovered, that because I don't know if they made an official announcement, but Disney is going to put a 5-minute preview of Pirates of the Caribbean 5 in front of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. That's very unusual for Disney to do something like that, and I think it shows a real concern for that weekend, the Memorial Day weekend, where Pirates is not only going up against Baywatch, which itself is very competitive. They're actually opening a day early to get a jump on Pirates. They're going to actually open that movie on Thursday. What a crazy weekend. So that means that there'll be previews. You know, the first showings for Baywatch will actually be Wednesday night. And so I think they're hoping to really get some word of mouth going so that they can beat out Pirates. If Baywatch beats Pirates of the Caribbean 5 for the weekend, that's going to be incredibly embarrassing for the Pirates franchise. And then don't forget that weekend you also have Netflix's original movie War Machine starring Brad Pitt. So that's a very competitive weekend. There's a lot of really interesting stuff going on there. A new franchise with a star on the rise, of an old franchise at this point with Pirates that's, trying to prove it still got it, and, its star still has it. It's a little more traditional. And then, of course, you have Netflix entering the fray with an original movie with one of the biggest movie stars in the world. So I'm pretty curious to see what everybody decides to watch. I'm actually going to watch all three because it's a long weekend, right? I mean, that's what I would want to do. But this is how I feel about Keira Knightley returning. I'm not a fan. And I'm not a fan about the way she seems to be returning. So she's like on a cliffside, and I think it's pretty clear that Will Turner, of course, can only return every 10 years because he's a new Davy Jones. And so I think she's like, oh, time for our appointment. What's up, right? But it disappoints me incredibly that she seems to no longer be a pirate, because what was the first trilogy about then, right? The first trilogy was all, and it was frustrating because the movies seemed to insist, and they've confirmed this, the screenwriters have confirmed this, that the original trilogy was really supposed to be Elizabeth Swann's story, and you're a swan song, and you're like, why isn't it Jack Sparrow's story, right? That seems odd to me. And I also think that Keira Knightley, as we've discussed multiple times, is very big on voguing. I know some of you are a fan, but most people aren't, which is why she's really struggled with her career outside of the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. And why nobody was sad to see her go when she insisted on leaving and refused to come back and was very disdainful of the whole situation. It's a little bit like Rachel Weisz with the Mummy movies, where she was like, I'm not coming back, I want to be considered a serious actor. And now nobody talks about Rachel Weisz at all. And I think that Keira Knightley has somewhat of a similar situation going on. So they made it all about, they were like, oh, it's Elizabeth Swann's story. And the screenwriters Terry Rossio and Ted Elliott said, yes, it's totally about Elizabeth Swann not wanting to be, this proper English woman and wants to instead be a pirate, right? And she took over like this, like the entire, Asian piracy part of the industry, which also was like not great, right? They're like, who should lead the Asian pirates? I know. I mean, they did it a long time ago, so it wasn't as big a deal. Like, you did that today, the movie would be dead in the water. I'd be like, your movie's a zombie dead in the water, and not in the way that you want it to be pirates. So, that was an odd choice, and I think that rubbed people the wrong way as well. But, the fact that she's no longer a pirate, I find that really uncool. I'm not happy about it. And I don't like that Keira Knightley's returning because, again, I didn't like that she was so, negative about the franchise. And also, her career has not gone well after she left, with the exception of The Imitation Game, where she did do a nice job. One of the few times where I think she didn't vogue as much. And she did earn her second Oscar nomination after her Oscar nomination for 2006's Pride and Prejudice, which, interestingly enough, was before the last two Pirates movies. So that's probably why she quit, because she was like, oh, I'm an Oscar-nominated actress now. I don't want to continue with this. I'm doing really well. And then, of course, famous last words. Now, Orlando Bloom is returning, so why am I not okay with Keira Knightley returning if I'm okay with Orlando Bloom returning? Well, I think that Orlando Bloom first returned in Lord of the Rings with the Hobbit films, and I also think he ate a lot of humble pie when he returned. He was like, yeah, I'm back. Sorry, guys. That was not cool of me. I mean, I think he really was like, I didn't know what I had until I lost it. And while I don't believe he officially said that, it seemed very much to be not only a part of his performance upon his return, but also just the way he carried himself with press and everything. He basically said, I made a mistake. And I was like, he did a mea culpa. And you're like, okay, you're forgiven. But with Keira Knightley, who, by the way, as you can see in this photo, is still voguing. Why doesn't someone tell her, you know why you're not doing that well? It's because of the voguing. I just think she's just not as likable. And also, I have to say, I don't like her being in the movie also because I really like Kay Scodelario, and I really want to make sure that she does well here. And I think that since she already kind of looks a little bit like Keira Knightley, and they're putting her in similar gowns to Keira Knightley's first Pirates movie, the similarities are enough. And so to actually have Keira Knightley show up, I don't know. It's kind of creepy, too, because, she seems to be having a romance, Kay Scodelario, with Keira Knightley's son, played by Brendan Thwaites. And, it's one thing, it was weird to think that someone would be romantically interested in someone who looked a lot like one of their parents, right? Ugh. Okay, Johnny Depp should totally comment on that as Jack Sparrow. All right, so that's the first story of the day. Now, speaking of female roles, in the wake of the success of The Fate of the Furious, another Latino-centric franchise is getting a new lease on life, and that's Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego. That's going to be brought back again as an animated series on Netflix, and they've already ordered 20 22-minute episodes. I'm not quite sure the style of animation. As you can see from this image, it looks at least like it's mimicking 2D animation, even though it might be done with computers, and that alone I think is very exciting. And for instance, last night I just decided to try the Tangled animated series, and while it had way too much singing in it, I was like, oh my god. I thought that the animation was actually pretty darn nice, and I thought that some of the stuff they did with the hair toward the end of, I fast forwarded through some of it, I'm sorry to say, because it was, again, too much singing and just a little too slow. But once she gets her hair back, her golden locks, some of the creative decisions on how to use it in the frame and when it glows and when it doesn't was pretty darn artistic. And also, I think that maybe it features some artwork from Glenn Keane's daughter, who helped design the movie as well, the animated movie. Tangled is also included, and it's really a beautiful piece of work. So I would hope that Carmen Sandiego will be around that as well. Now, Carmen Sandiego was a very popular computer game in the 80s, and then it became an animated series in the 90s. And of course, old is new again with Power Rangers, Beauty and the Beast, so why not bring back Carmen Sandiego? And she will be voiced by Jane the Virgin's Gina Rodriguez, who's very excited, she has said, to follow in the footsteps of one of her idols, Rita Moreno, who voiced the original character in that 90s animated series. Which Rita Moreno she has a very famous legacy in Hollywood because she was one of the few genuinely Latina actors cast in West Side Story, which was for the most part whitewashed. Like you had Natalie Wood playing Maria. But Rita Moreno was like the sexy woman in the gang, and she has like an amazing musical number. She's very talented. And, it was a big deal that they actually cast someone who was ethnically correct for the film. But anyway, in the late 90s, what else is interesting about this is that speaking of whitewashing, Disney wanted to make a Carmen Sandiego movie, but they wanted Sandra Bullock to play the lead. And she's not Latina! And then last time it was in development was Walden Media, who wanted Jennifer Lopez as the lead, but I think Jennifer Lopez, I don't think a movie with her in it would do particularly well these days. Now, this could potentially launch into a movie. Now, Gina Rodriguez, well, actually a pretty darn highly regarded actress in the TV space, is too TV, I think, to be a movie, unless Netflix decides to make their own original live-action movie based on their animated series, and then I think Gina would be a perfect choice, and maybe that's one of the reasons that they're having her do the voice for the character. But if I wanted to make it a movie that would play in theaters, it's weird because a lot of the Latina actresses working today who are a name are too TV or are older, and so it's hard to think who would be cast as Carmen Sandiego. And I would actually maybe go with Ana de Armas, who's in the upcoming Blade Runner 2049. And I saw her first in War Dogs, the Jonah Hill Miles Teller movie, where I thought, even though she played the traditional wife role, like, I don't like what you're doing, why do you keep lying to me? What a thankless role. But on that note, I thought she did a great job with a thankless role, the best it could possibly be done. And I thought she had a lot of personality. And also, she's really gorgeous, but she doesn't let that stop her from being a very dynamic persona, which is really nice to see. So I'm actually a big Ana de Armas fan, which is saying something because she has done some extensive nudity in her past, and I'm usually not a fan of that. So that's how likable Ana de Armas is. Now, speaking of likable actors, let's talk about Riz Ahmed, who I've been very worried about because his career seems to have stalled. He was looking so good for a while there with The Night Of, and then, of course, he's in Rogue One, and I was so excited about that. But his role was pretty small in Rogue One. I didn't think he had a lot to do, and he really just wasn't even given the chance to make an impression, and therefore didn't make an impression. But he just landed a very nice gig. So he was just cast in The Sisters Brothers, which is about brothers Eli and Charles Sisters, so Sisters is their last name, who go on a job to kill a prospector who was stolen from their boss. But this is where it gets really cool. It takes place in Oregon and California in 1851. What? That sounds so great. All right, and it's a dark comedic Western. It started out as a novel, and I think to me it has like a little bit of a Hateful Eight feel to it, and I loved Hateful Eight, Tarantino's recent Western film. Really masterfully done. So if this can come anywhere close to that, I would be very happy. Now, let me describe the project to you from the business end, how it's coming together as a package. If you don't know that term, packaging is when you put the talent all together and then you take it to a studio and you go, look what I've made for you, okay? So you usually package, you have the screenplay or the property already together, and then you package usually the director and the actors. And they're usually all represented by the same agency, or the majority of them are. And so that's something that's because studios no longer have in-house talent because they got rid of the studio system. The packaging, which was once done by the studios, is now done by the agencies. So that's why it's very important where you're represented, because it makes a difference in what packages you can be a part of. All right, sometimes they go outside of the agency to package. Like, for instance, Rosamund Pike was just packaged into a movie about a war journalist, and she's represented by a different, CAA packaged it, and I think she's represented by United Artists. So United, it's not the airline, so that's I think she was just so right for the role, that's why it worked. But usually they tend to go in-house because that means they get all the commissions on the salaries. That's why they do it. All right, so anyway, in this movie, The Sisters Brothers, Joaquin Phoenix will star, John C. Reilly, and Jake Gyllenhaal, who, of course, Riz Ahmed already co-starred with in Nightcrawler. What a good movie. Oh, so good. If only Open Road could have gotten the Oscar momentum it needed. You know, it depends who releases your movie when it comes to awards season. But I think I'm just so happy for Riz Ahmed to join that cast, and I think that cast is lucky to have him. I think he's a great actor. Now, directing this will be Jacques Audiard. I'm sure I mispronounced that. French BTT viewers, please help us down below, who is a French director who is the son of very, famed French director Michel Audiard. Michel, the French version of Michael. All right, so he recently did a film called Dupin, which did very well at Cannes, where it won the Palme d'Or in 2015, and that's been his ticket to Hollywood. So now he's making this movie, which will be his first English language film. I hope it turns out better. I forget the director's name, but he did La Vie en Rose with Marion Cotillard. It's a very long movie. It's about Edith Piaf, but it's so good. And then he went on to do the Grace of Monaco movie with Harvey Weinstein, and the movie infamously ended up on the Lifetime network after years of being stalled, but it ruined that guy's career. So it's hard to make the leap to Hollywood, and I hope that, remember The Artist? Where'd all those people go from The Artist, right? Jean Dujardin won the freaking Oscar, and he doesn't work in Hollywood. It's a crazy town. He should have gotten someone better to package him. So anyway, I'm looking forward to this movie, and good for you, Riz Ahmed. You just don't quit. Just keep yourself in the game, keep moving forward, even if it's an inch at a time, and hopefully he'll eventually make it, because I think he's just so talented. Now let's go to the viewer question of the day, which is from F12MNB. I like that. That's a very THX username. So F12MNB says, Dear Grace, when a film runs a long time, does the split of the ticket sales between the theaters and studios change? I read that Titanic, a film that ran a very long time, was a real boon for theaters because after the initial weeks, the theater chains got a bigger and bigger slice of the ticket profits. Thanks again for a great channel. Thank you for a great question, F12MNB. Great question. We often talk about this, the studio split and how much money a movie needs to make to break even. And I think it's because a lot of people don't realize that at the end of the day, a studio usually gets about 50% of the box office take. Although I think that number's changing a little bit because, as many of you like to point out, China keeps more of the money because they're not the most on the up and up nation. Maybe it all evens out to still 50% because movies today are so front-loaded that would favor the studios in terms of revenue split. But it's supposed to be a 50-50 split. But movies come out so much these days and don't play that long, which is probably why everyone loves Get Out. That's a great example of a movie that's become a boon for theater owners. I think it still works about 50-50%. But anyway, this is the way it works. So there's a split, a revenue split. In the very beginning, the studio gets the majority of the ticket sales because the theaters don't need as much incentive to have the movie play at their theater because they want the big crowds to come in and buy from the concession stand. That's where they make their money. Tons and tons of money. That's why it's so expensive to eat at the concession stand, right? So the theater owners go, okay, I'll take the food sales and I'll give you the majority of the ticket sales, right? But then the studio needs to incentivize the theater to keep the movie playing if it's doing well. Even if it's maybe only doing medium. They're like, oh, but you're making more money on my movie than you are on the new movie that just showed up, right? So maybe because, like Get Out would be maybe more lucrative than, let's say, what movie, like Smurfs, the Last Village, right? They're like, oh, Smurfs just came out, but more people are seeing Get Out, or maybe like they're buying more food, I don't know. And so that's a little bit better for us. So the longer a movie plays in theaters, the percentage starts, it shifts continually. As soon as the movie hits the theater, you have a percentage start, and then week by week it shifts. And so the longer it goes, the more it goes to the advantage of the theater. And again, that's to make sure that they don't kick the movie out for a new release, right? They're like, at least give me one screen to keep my movie playing. So but movies rarely play as long as James Cameron films, because both Titanic and Avatar were had a very incredible longevity at the theater, which is, again, very unusual these days. And I think the only film we've seen recently that's done particularly well is Get Out. Although Beauty and the Beast, I think, has done really well in addition because of the multiple viewings. So maybe Beauty and the Beast is a good example as well, because also its numbers are so much higher than Get Out. It's more ticket sales for the theater. So I think those are the two movies right now in theaters that the theaters themselves probably have really prefer. So anyway, that's today's morning movie news. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories, the viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.